Hello everybody, welcome back to the World AI Only Free-For-All series. This is part 12. In the last episode, I do realize, after the fact I should say, that the episode ended a little bit prematurely. That was of course episode 11. It ended about 8 minutes before it should have, and by the time I realized the mistake, the file was already rendered and the original was deleted. So I will make sure in the future to keep an eye on these things and ensure that doesn't happen again. In terms of what you guys have missed, you guys only missed about, I think, 2 turns. Persia was pushing into Kiev and was pushed back by the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union is pushing back into Armenia. Remains to be seen whether or not they are able to capture the city that has 114 defense, which is actually more than Moscow. Or just about as much as Moscow, I should say. In terms of what else you guys missed, I don't believe you missed very much else. Of course, Persia has settled a new city of Tushpa in Central Asia, and Korea, of course, very much in control of Eastern Siberia, although I think that was already covered in the episode before it ended prematurely. As I always do at the end of my episodes, I go over the demographics. I'll go ahead and do that now, just because I know you guys missed this on the end of last episode. Of course, Persia is in the lead of everything, as you guys can see here. Not too surprising there, although Korea is not very far behind them in technology. Another development, Venezuela has expanded west across the Andean range. I'm not sure if that was discussed in the final 8 minutes of the episode that were left out. Another thing that I always do at the end of my episodes is go over the culture overview. And nothing really has changed all too much. Persia, of course, still very much in the lead of happiness with 127 happiness. France has swapped over from autocracy to order. And besides that, nothing too special. Of course, autocracy is facing dissidents and even a revolutionary wave in England. So we should probably see the revolution or an ideological shift in England itself. Besides that, nothing too important has happened between that gap that we have missed. I guess one of the largest developments in the last episode was that France is pushing back into Soviet territory. Of course, the territory of Berlin and Hamburg, that once belonged to France, is now, at least the French hope to reclaim this territory. We will see, of course, if they are successful in this gambit. So now I think we can go ahead and continue where we left off. The world as it is still incredibly polarized. We have 2 world powers, the Soviet Union and the Persian Empire, although the, I guess, bipolarity, or bipolarization of the world is not exactly certain, as regional contenders such as Korea are starting to rise and advance rapidly. Of course, we're seeing mobile SAMs and nuclear submarines on the part of the Koreans. Of course, they also have attack helicopters, modern infantry, and nuclear bombs as well. And they're not the only ones. In fact, the Swahili Sultanate is also rapidly modernizing. We've got rocket infantry over here, rocket artillery, battleships and destroyers. Really, everybody is modernizing with the exception of France, England, the Shoshone, and Venezuela. Of course, Denmark and Germany are also in this category, as they are incredibly backwards, especially Denmark. So without further ado, let's go ahead and continue where we left off. I'm going to be keeping my camera over here as I have for the past few episodes, so we can get a good view on what happens over here in Western Europe and in kind of like the Middle Eastern / Caucasian region, the Caucasian theater. So let's go ahead and end the turn and see where this episode takes us. And I want to again apologize for not catching that error with the rendering. Sometimes Sony Vegas just decides to stop rendering halfway through. It tells me that it's completed the render, but I guess there's no way to know unless if you actually go through it and check by hand. So next time I'll make sure I load that up in VLC and take a look for myself. So Darius has declared war upon Germany. Germany has been declared upon by Washington as well. We will go over to Central Asia now to see exactly what the facts on the ground are. We've got, of course, an attack helicopter outside of Tushpa, Persia. We'll see if they charge in to take Essen. Washington, of course, also at war. They have an astounding amount of units for a civilization with only one city, because right now they're basically only a city-state for all intents and purposes. Going west now into the European theater once again. Of course, in the last episode, I should have prefaced this by saying in my wrap-up, the Shoshone have made peace with the Venezuelans. The Venezuelans and the Shoshone are no longer at war. Therefore, North and South America are in a period of peace, which is a very good thing for them. And Africa as well in a definitive period of peace after they have conquered Japanese Alaska. As you guys can see, Japanese Alaska is in the hands of the Kilwa Sultanate, Kilwini Sultanate. So let's go back over here to our trusty European and Asian theater, where we can watch to see what happens. Of course, France is making a move on Berlin, but the Soviet Union thus far has been able to defend its German-occupied territory. We'll be keeping an eye on Persian Armenia. It almost rolls off the tongue to say Soviet Armenia. I was so used to saying that. But now territory has changed. Armenia is in the hands of the Persians. And although Kiev has fallen twice, it is still in the grasp of the Soviet Union. They have taken it back from the Persian aggressors, and it is still firmly Soviet territory. We're going to go east now to check to see if Germany is still alive and kicking. They are, which is a good thing. Perhaps they might want to send out some more settlers to guarantee their independence here. We have a Great War bomber outside of Tushpa, perhaps the last Great War bomber in the entire Persian Empire. It seems that Persia is content with sending technologically inferior units to their periphery, which is, I guess, often the case in real life as well. So we're going to go back to the active war theater here in Europe, where we will end our turn. And I know I said this on previous episodes, but if the Soviet Union or Persia had settled a city over here, and right outside the modern-day Constantinople, or rather Istanbul, they would have been able to make a port, or rather a canal, which would allow movement through the Mediterranean and the Black Seas. Venezuela, of course, making peace with Persia, after Persia had a failed invasion attempt into South America, which was repulsed by Venezuelan Air Force and naval units, which is good for Venezuela. They are now officially at peace with Persia, and now they can trade with the largest land empire in the game. We're going to continuously end our turns here, as there is only one other war currently going on, and that's with Germany. We'll make sure that we keep our eyes peeled over there for new developments. But for the time being, we can kind of keep our camera over here on the European theater. Of course, the Soviet Union was making an advance into Armenia, but their tanks were destroyed by Persia. Persia with some great generals and some marines, as well as probably paratroopers at this point. Or no, we're not quite to paratroopers, but we have a very large military buildup outside of Persepolis, and Persepolis has a massive 187 defense bonus, which is just huge. We've got a renewed offensive, it seems, heading towards Krasnodar. We have, of course, a Persian helicopter gunship and Persian marine unit heading north, and we also have another Persian settler who will more than likely settle either Siberia or Central Asia to connect Frankfurt and Tushpa. So, going back to the active front, France has made an attempt into Berlin, although Berlin now is defended with some Iosif Stalin S-2 tanks, and the city itself is unscathed as of this moment. Now, something that I'm wondering is, where did all these Soviet Air Force units go? The Soviet Union, of course, had a massive Air Force, but now it's been reduced to practically nothing. I see one aircraft, which is a bomber, outside of Berlin. Perhaps they have more units scattered throughout the empire. I will check, of course, as soon as this turn expires. Let's go ahead and take a quick look. Of course, there's a golden age for Rome, atop the mountain of Mount Olympus over here in the southern part of the map. Let's go over here, where it seems like the Soviet Union has either downgraded its air force, or they've just lost most of their I guess, air capabilities here. We, of course, have a Persian attack helicopter outside of Krasnodar. Soviet Union needs to mount more defenses over here in their eastern territories if they are to survive and preserve their territorial integrity. We're going back over here to Western Europe, where we will continue on into time is, of course, 22 AD, and not a whole lot has changed in the past few episodes. We have a lot of territorial status quo as civilizations catch up to each other and modernize into the information era. We, of course, will be seeing some giant death robots pretty soon, which is, of course, the final military unit that civilizations can research. Something probably akin to, Gundam series, anime, or whatever they're called, those Japanese gigantic robots. I think that's what the death robots are going after. I don't see any XCOM squads yet either, which is the final form of infantry, which is probably a good thing for the Soviet Union, as Persia would definitely get it first. And what strikes me as particularly odd is that for the size of the Persian Empire, their science is incredibly developed. Of course, in civilization, the more cities you have, the more difficult it is for you to technologically advance your empire. Although, given the population centers of Persia, I guess it's not too surprising that they are outpacing science, even with their territory in check. Check this out. Right outside the gates of Paris, the Soviet Union has plopped down a new citadel. Definitely going to be pissing off the French over here. And of course, we have two more Soviet great generals. It remains to be seen whether or not they will be destroyed by invading French anti-aircraft guns and artillery, along with Great War infantry. England over here is still content to rule the island. And in addition to that, they also control the exclave of Ribe in Copenhagen, in modern-day, I believe, Estonia and Finland. Of course, Russia as well. This is pretty much the location of St. Petersburg, aka Leningrad. And over here in Copenhagen, which is like modern-day Norway or Sweden, kind of on the border. So we're going to go back to... Oh, I almost forgot to mention that England also has a exclave over here in Nottingham, which I believe is Archangel, modern-day Archangel. I'm not quite sure. So going back to the south, we do have quite a bit of tensions rising in Western Europe now that these citadels have been so brazenly placed by the Soviet great generals. It remains to be seen whether or not France destroys these citadels or perhaps places their own, considering they have their own great general. Persia in firm control of Yerevan, as all of the Soviet attackers into Armenia have been expelled. And let's see what happens. The Soviet Union has just denounced Korea, which is quite a bit of development. We have a revolution in Venezuela where order has been accepted as the national ideology. Of course, they were fascist with autocracy, but that has switched over to communism, which is very interesting. Over here in Shoshone, North America, not a lot has changed. A lot of stagnation, it would seem. Technology is not quite advancing with the rest of the world. We do, of course, have ironclads, but we don't have nuclear explosives or nuclear weapons yet. We still have infantry in the Great War era, although that is much better than the United States, which still is rocking riflemen and cannons, so they are quite a bit behind. And Korea over here with battleships and nuclear bombs, it remains to be seen whether or not they decide to attack Russia, who has just recently denounced them. Going over here to Central Asia, where Persia is dropping paratroopers into the Soviet Union. We're going to end our turn over here to take a look at Germany and see how they're doing, as well as the Persian invasion into Central Asia. Quebec, now an ally with Persia, so they have been declared upon, or rather they have declared war on Stalin. We have a much larger attack force, it seems, heading north through Central Asia now, as opposed to the Armenian front, which has largely stagnated. Of course, the Soviet Union very capable of defending its border here in modern-day Kazakhstan along this mountain range over here. And for any Kazakh viewers, I believe that this is actually like in the modern-day city of Almaty, the capital of Kazakhstan. I believe it's in a very mountainous area. You guys can, of course, correct me if that is incorrect. Going over here to Western Europe, where we have some Stalinist great generals outside of the city, or outside of the gates of Paris itself. It's a miracle how they have not been captured. Really just incredibly lucky, I guess, that they have not been captured. Over here in Africa, we don't have too much in the way of developments. Of course, all the cities are increasing in population. I think they have a problem, perhaps, with happiness. Let's go ahead and take a look. Kilwa, yeah, -7 happiness. They are in no position to create settlers. Of course, pretty much every single autocratic civilization has swapped over into order. Soviet Union will probably be the next to swap over. And with the adoption of communism, Venezuela is now in the positive happiness with 27, which is a massive improvement over their previous situation of being under autocracy. Let's go now to end our turn over here in the Eurasian theater, where we are outside of the border between the Soviet Union and Persia. This is just an absolute battle for attrition. Nobody seems to be getting the upper hand after the fall of Armenia, and both empires are funneling massive amounts of troops and material into trying to get the upper hand and pushing back their respective invaders across the border. We've got a much larger contingent force now outside of Armenia, as you guys can see, and in France as well, where in another brazen act of outright annexation, the Soviet Union has decided to make a double citadel outside of the walls of Paris itself. Now, any French invaders into the Soviet, or rather former French territory that is now held by Soviet citadels, will suffer double attrition, as their unique ability is the Iron Curtain, which will give them 10 points of damage, and the Citadel itself, which will give them 15, which is a staggering 25 points of damage, which is 1/4 the health of these units that of damage they will take every turn. Over here in Germany, Germany's still holding on to Essen, which is a definitely good thing for the German people. We, of course, have some trade, or at least the beginnings of trade with the Soviet Union. Perhaps Germany will get lucky enough to acquire a defensive alliance with the Soviets, although that seems to be unlikely at this point. We actually have, check this out, we actually have some Russian helicopter gunships now. The Soviet Union has developed helicopter gunships. This is a fantastic piece of news for those of you who wish to see the Soviet Union triumph over the Persian invaders. Definitely a very good thing to see Soviet technology increase with the rest of the world here. And we're going to go ahead and end our turn here. Persia has declared war on England, which this is a major development. We'll keep our eyes outside of London and, of course, Scotland and Scandinavia to see what exactly happens here. And the Shoshone have also declared war on England with the Koreans in tow. So we're about to see a large-scale invasion of the British Islands. We will see, of course, who gets to claim this territory. Or, conversely, if England is able to hold off the defenders, which will be quite unexpected, but definitely still in the realm of possibility. Of course, we have some nuclear submarines and battleships off the coast of England. England with its massive fleet somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, perhaps maybe in the Pacific now. They had a very large amount of privateers. They seem to be off of the coast of South America. And there's a lot of naval units just kind of hanging around the Americas. As you guys can see, we have a massive privateer fleet that England controls. And if England is able to prevent Korea from getting over the British Islands with its massive fleet, that's good. Of course, Korea possesses a much more advanced fleet than England does, although I believe that they have fewer numbers. So we'll see if quality or quantity triumphs in this department. Soviet Union plopping down yet more citadels, this time in modern day, I believe, Upper Austria or perhaps the Czech Republic, encroaching on French soil. France, of course, now has no options to even go inside of Soviet territory without taking citadel damage. I'm going to end my turn over here so we can kind of watch as the French take massive attrition next turn outside of these citadels. Kilwa has declared war upon Germany. Very interesting. And France has declared war upon Germany. France is also at war with England. Everybody is jumping on England. We'll see this development and how it goes. Of course, now these French units inside the Soviet Union are going to take a terrible amount of attrition. We'll be keeping our eye on this. on this particular development. Of course, the Shoshone have just announced the Soviet Union. Perhaps this is an indication that a future invasion is to come. I'd like to see this attrition happen over here with the French, although nothing happened. I guess the percent chance of Iron Curtain proccing is lower than I expected, and perhaps even if you're within the Citadel and control the Citadel, the attrition rates do not occur, so the French are very lucky. Now over here outside of Armenia, a much larger Persian force is pushing upwards towards the Caucasus region, outside of Soviet Leningrad and Kiev. Of course, now that the Soviet Union possesses helicopter gunships, we will see if that is enough to turn the tide against the Persian invaders. And Persia also settling some new city over here, perhaps in Central Asia. Korea, very much a tall civilization that's not really focusing on spreading out with more settlers. We will see, of course, if they are able to reach England, which we will focus on next. So, okay, so South America, definitely preserving the status quo over here. Going to England, where we have some nuclear submarines and battleships off the coast. Was London nuked, or has it always been at 13? I think the capital has always been very sparsely populated. No nukes have been dropped yet, which is a very good thing, I guess, for the proliferation movement, which is picking up in steam. We're going to go ahead and now and end the turn, and we'll be keeping an eye, of course, on the European and Eurasian theater, as we normally do. We'll see, of course, if France is able to push into the Soviet Union. It looks like they are able to do so. Soviet hegemony over Germany is definitely in question now that we have a much larger French force in previously firmly controlled Soviet territory. We will be checking this development as more information hits the scene. Outside of Armenia, we have a massive military force coming from the Persian capital of Persepolis, marching north into the Soviet Union. Of course, the Soviet Union answering and responding to this force with equal force, attacking with Iosif Stalin II tanks and helicopter gunships alike, with fighter and bomber escorts. Definitely a question of who controls the commons here, as there is a massive, influence and advantage for whoever controls the Air Force and whoever controls the sea. We are seeing a lot less battleships here in the Black Sea. I think that Persia was successful in perhaps sinking quite a few of them. We're going to be keeping our eye out over here on England, France, Germany, or rather Soviet Germany, and Armenia, where warfare is starting to pick up. Most of these French units are marching past Berlin, perhaps even heading towards Hamburg. We will keep our eye on this most recent development. And England as well is in a very particular situation, as France is now outside of the gates of London, of course blockading the capital of the British Empire. Going now over to Central Asia and Eurasia, where, hold on, it's a little bit hard for me to scroll when the turns are ending, so okay, that's fine. We don't have a lot in the way of new developments. Of course, Venezuela has just declared war on France. Perhaps this is a foreshadowing of Venezuelan interests in West Africa. We will see, of course, if Venezuela is able to get a foothold into French-held territory over here in Toulouse and Oran. We have a atomic bomb that is held by the Persian Empire that's heading north into England or the British Isles. We're going to go ahead and end our turn once again to see what developments transpire in this turn. Of course, Kilwa denouncing Venezuela, perhaps also foreshadowing a future hostilities between the African power and perhaps the future West African power of Venezuela. So now we are waiting for Persia to end their turn. They are sending A lot of troops north of the Caucasus. For the first time in 10 turns, we actually are seeing a Persian military force north of the Soviet border here in Central Asia, or rather, I guess, Soviet Europe here, as it's west of the Ural Mountains, which is the geographic, I guess, dividing line between Soviet Europe and Soviet Asia. Soviet Union able to push back most of the units, with the exception of a Persian paratrooping squadron and a Persian bazooka unit. Now let's go over to Berlin, where the French units, as I said before, are skipping Berlin and heading straight to Hamburg, or perhaps even more seriously to Leningrad or Moscow. We will see, of course, with bated breath to see exactly what develops here. We have the massive Venezuelan armada heading east to Iran. Although there is not a large military contingent along with the naval contingent, we only see 3 Great War infantry. So they're lacking in conventional, I guess, army, a conventional army there that is embarked with their ships. Going back over here to the Eurasian theater, let's take a look over at Germany, which is still successfully holding out against the Persia. And Persia also has a Persian settler over here that is heading probably to the north or to the east to settle this land in modern eastern Siberia. We will keep our eyes out on future developments. And take a look at this. The amount of naval units in the Indian Sea here is just too damn high. We've got, of course, destroyers, nuclear submarines, missile cruisers, all sorts of very scary naval units. We're going to kind of look around the Persian Empire now to see what other developments Darius has up his sleeves. And perhaps in the Pacific Ocean too, if there's any battle going on over here. Of course, there was a massive English fleet. It's now outside of the Korean city of Nagoya, where they will most likely be destroyed, as privateers don't stand a chance against Korean ironclad units and Korean cruiser units. England still very much able to retain its sovereignty. We'll see if that changes in the next turn. So we're going to go ahead and end our turn. And like I said in the previous episode, Anatolia is still no man's land. Very interesting development for me because, like I said, Anatolia has access to oil, various strategic resources, and of course stone and sheep. Darius has just completed the Hubble Space Telescope, but do not worry. The scientific victory is not enabled for this particular series, so even if he was to develop all of the space parts, only domination victory is enabled, meaning that even if he is able to complete the International Space Station, it means nothing, effectively. There is a battle raging inside the Soviet Union now between Kiev and Armenia. Stalin, of course, modernizing into the information era. He now has access to potentially new units, including modern infantry, as opposed to Great War infantry. And France still has yet to make a move with all of their units, all of their military units outside of Berlin and Hamburg. We will see if this situation changes. Going now to West Africa, where the Venezuelan fleet is making a move on France. Of course, France has an undefended port in Oran, and Toulouse is also undefended. I think this may or may not be the last turn that we will be ending in this episode. We need to end the episode relatively soon so I can go over the demographics and the rest of the pertinent information for you guys. Of course, Persia is taking its time with its massive amount of military units. They definitely have their sights set upon Kiev. Kiev is only has half of its health left over. But it's at this point that I think that Persia is actually overextending their reach for global hegemony here, being at war, of course, with England and the Soviet Union at the same time. Perhaps it's opening too many fronts. I can definitely see a French front opening in the future where Persia seeks to gain influence in Western Europe. France, for themselves, has completely skipped Berlin. They're on their way to Hamburg. We will see what happens over here. I'm not even sure, actually, if France is at war with the Soviet Union. I was under the impression that they were. They probably signed peace, and they actually might just be moving on Ribe. So, with that being said, I mean, they're not taking any damage from the citadels. They're not taking any damage from the Iron Curtain. I think at this point it's safe to assume that France is on the way to taking English Ribe, of course, in modern-day Leningrad. So we'll see how long England has left for its hegemony here in Eastern Europe. Of course, Kiev is in a very precarious situation as it's under siege by all sorts of fighters and bombers on behalf of the Persian Empire. We do have some Persian mechanized infantry making their way north of the border, as do we have some SAM units and rocket infantry as well. Very scary. Going to Central Asia, we still see this Persian settler probably making its way north. We're going to go ahead and end one more turn before we finalize this episode, episode 12. So let's go ahead and do that and see what transpires in this turn. Of course, France is at peace with the Soviet Union, that much is certain at this point. Although they were not able to march to Ribe as they have changed their mind. Leningrad, under siege as well by Persia, has for the first time in this series, a nuclear bomb has been dropped, and it's been dropped on top of Leningrad. This is very, very bad news for the Soviet Union. All the Soviet army that was outside of Leningrad has been obliterated. We do have a massive movement here to try and defend these cities. But yes, for the very first time in the series, a nuclear bomb has been dropped. And I hate to just ramble about history, but this is somewhat historically accurate, as the Ukrainian city of Pripyat, which is about, let's say, somewhere over here, perhaps where this citadel is a good indicator of where it might be. In Ukraine, there was a massive nuclear explosion back in the 80s. Of course, Chernobyl is a very well-known event here in the West. But the nuclear fallout actually spread throughout most of Eastern Europe, and including Northern Europe as well, in Scandinavia. But a large portion of Ukraine had nuclear, radiation levels that were well above the national averages. And this includes this area over here, which is a little bit to the east of where Kiev would be in real life, kind of over here on the border between the Russian Federation and the Ukrainian nation today. So, with that being said, the first nuclear bomb has been dropped in this game on Leningrad. This is ushering in an entirely new era of nuclear warfare on the part of all parties involved. Of course, there's also some nuclear fallout outside of Kiev itself, which makes me think that the nuclear explosion targeted both Leningrad and Kiev. Perhaps it exploded somewhere over here. Excuse me. Let's take a look now to see if the Soviet Union has any nuclear bombs of its own. Of course, Stalin is in the informational era, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the atomic bomb yet. They do not. So, a very asymmetrical warfare here between a belligerent nuclear power and a global power, I guess, at this point. The Soviet Union is, but they might be reduced to regional power, depending on how much the Persians can push in and how many nuclear bombs they drop up atop Moscow up here. Of course, Persepolis taking damage as well. It seems like... Wow, okay. So, let me go ahead and retract the statement that I just gave. Of course, the Soviet Union does have nuclear bombs. They dropped one on Persepolis as well. This is a period of nuclear conflict. We have Moscow, of course, is safe from nuclear explosions for the time being, but this might be a game changer. For the first time, Persepolis has fallen in population. They've been nuked, perhaps not into the Stone Ages, but definitely into at least the industrial era over here, and massive amount of fallout in central Persia, as we can see over here. And this is in a very interesting developments. So I want you guys to stay tuned for episode 13, where nuclear warfare is going to play a more and more important part in the conflicts to come. We, of course, are seeing a new front open up here in northern Anatolia, and we also see more atomic bombs will be dropped perhaps in southern Russia and northern Persia. Of course, Persia with a massive contingent of Marines and mobile SAMs ready to strike into the Russian heartland. Let's go now off the coast of Africa, where Iran is also being overrun by Venezuela. Definitely something to be watching out for on the next episode. So again, I want to thank you guys very much for watching. Let's take a look at the score. Persia in the lead, unsurprisingly, with the Soviet Union in the second place, not too far behind. Third place actually belongs to the Shoshone, who is a rising power, it seems, with their technology and population centers. Number 4 belongs to Kilwa, and number 5 belongs to Korea. These are the only civilizations past the 1,000 score marker, and that are really worth talking about at this point. So let's go now to the cultural overview, where, as I said earlier, we saw Venezuela switch from autocracy to order, and now they're quite happy about it. Persia still rising in happiness, unbelievably. And England, definitely the black sheep over here, with a happiness of -4 and a revolutionary wave that is sweeping across their country. Let's take a look now at the demographics section. And you would think that after an atomic bomb was detonated outside of Persepolis, of course, the major Persian population center, the population for Persia would decrease. Perhaps Persia has lost close to a few million people in that explosion. I would probably estimate up to about 10 million people were killed in this explosion, as Persia had a citizen rating of 28 in its city, or 29 before it was bombed. So terrible loss of life here in the Persian Empire, a offense that Persia will not forget, and this may or may not push Persian Persian public opinion towards wiping out the Soviet Union in its entirety. So guys, once again, thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for part 13. See you on the next episode.